So when you think about the leading country for most U.S. imports, products that they bring into America, who would you think about? You would think about China, right? Well, of course it's China. They have the most import coming in the last 15 years. You know who just passed them up? Mexico. Mexico passed up China for U.S. imports? Yes. How is that even possible? Because if you look at this chart here, you will notice just 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2018, 2019, China had a $200 billion lead on U.S. imports over Mexico. How did Mexico all of a sudden catch up? Are they just so brilliant and they're capitalistic and their economy is booming and it blew up? Or is it the fact that China didn't like the tariffs that Trump put on them and China decided to invest into their businesses in Mexico to avoid the tariffs because there's no tariffs in Mexico? And Trump just recently said, hey, President Xi, if you're watching this, if you think you're going to get away with this and if I get elected, I'm going to put 100% tariff on the cars you're bringing up here.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car.
So he found out what the loophole they were using. It's called Mexico, and he wants to put a stop to it. Wait till I show you some of these numbers here on what China is doing to get away without having to pay the tariffs. They're using Mexico. We're going to talk about that today. So if you get value out of this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. By the way, I mean, China's going to be strategic. You think about when you go hire an accountant, what does an accountant do for you? They try to find ways for you to be able to save on taxes. But look at this as a country. The accountants of China sat there and said, let's save money on tariffs, taxes, fines, whatever you want to call it, by going to Mexico. And they built an 850 hectare, like 2,100 acres of the land headquarters of a company called Hufusan that they put, I think, $1.1 billion in to produce cars in the last 3 years. Now you got to keep in mind this is important because out of the 33 Chinese automakers, part makers registered in Mexico, 18 of them export to what country you think? U.S., according to the NIA. And watch what an executive of one Chinese company who located a manufacturing base in Mexico explained. If you want to do good business with America, you must have something close to the market. Mexico close to the market. Such investment decisions are not by coincidence, as Chinese executives have openly admitted. They've shifted manufacturing to Mexico to avoid paying the tariff of 25% they'd otherwise face by manufacturing in China. And even one Mexican investment executive acknowledged that Section 301 tariffs led to a flow of Chinese capital into Mexico. It was not common for us to help Chinese companies. And if you look at this chart on how much money goes into Mexico from 1999 till today, 1999, barely anything. Look what it looks like in 2017, 18, 19, 2020, and then 2021. Record-breaking 2022. Mexico's sitting there saying, we've never gotten this kind of money from China before. And after all these tariffs imposed by U.S. government to China in 2018, a lot of Chinese companies are obviously starting knocking on the door of wanting to come here. So now somebody may say, well, wait a minute, didn't we have a NAFTA agreement that we signed with Mexico and Canada, the North American Free Trade Agreement that was enacted in 1994 by Bill Clinton with Mexico, Canada, and U.S. The most important feature in this deal was the bilateral commercial relationship. And as of January 1st of 2008, all tariffs and quotas were eliminated on U.S. exports to Mexico and Canada under the NAFTA agreement that they have. So look at China. They're sitting there saying, well, we can do Canada and we can do Mexico because the top three countries that import the most to U.S. have historically been who? China, Mexico, Canada. Mexico, Canada, part of NAFTA. China, complete separate story. And now they don't like the tariffs that are being imposed on them. So according to reports, the Chinese were building this property that we were talking about, Hufusan. The industrial park is expected to grow to 35 businesses over the next 2 years and have as many as 15,000 workers when at full capacity, more than half the size of the nearest town of Salinas, Victoria. And by the way, the accountants of China are so intellectual. Look what they just figured out here as well. Electric vehicles with parts made in Mexico can qualify for a U.S. consumer tax credit of as much as $7,500. Under the 2022 Inflation Reductionary Act, U.S. tax lawyers have highlighted the Chinese-owned subsidiary based in Mexico could build full EVs that would qualify for $7,500 tax credit so long as no battery minerals or components were sourced from China. They can source it from somewhere else. Can you imagine? $7,500 per. Whoever came up with this, the accountant, the strategist in China, you are brilliant. But only if a man potentially with orange hair who likes to give tariffs to countries like you imposes one on Mexico, some may say he can't do it because of the NAFTA agreement, but knowing him, he's going to want to push for it because as this conversation is now out there and everybody is now seeing the data of how all of a sudden China wants to invest in Mexico and you want to build this 2,100 acre Huff-You-San place with 15,000 employees where 18 out of the 33 parts and stuff that you're selling coming to America and the $7,500 tax credit they're going to be getting, everyone's going to start saying, wait a minute. Mexico, I thought you were an ally. What are you doing something like this, taking the money from them? Mexico may be in trouble with this, but the president of Mexico, I don't know if he cares that much. Now, this is important to kind of give you the numbers on tariffs. Currently, Chinese-built electric vehicles are subject to 27.5% tariffs when imported into the United States. That is composed of a 2.5% tariff that generally applies to imported cars, plus an additional 25% tariff on Chinese-made cars that were introduced by Trump's administration in 2018. And China's largest EV automaker recently passed Tesla in sales, is looking at locations in Mexico near the U.S. border. Why do you think? Because Chinese companies now have 25 to 30% cost advantage over U.S. competitors because of the dominance in the EV battery supply chain and processing of critical minerals, as well as low-cost labor and attractive energy prices. What does it mean? They can build a car in Mexico much cheaper than we can build the cars in America due to our labor is more expensive than the labor of Mexico. Big advantage to China going through Mexico. And if you're wondering what the labor rates are, let me kind of give it to you. When looking at China versus Mexico manufacturing, labor rates in Mexico are now, in many cases, lower than China. Labor in Mexico is lower than China in constant dollar terms. Mexico also offers steadier wages, making it easier for companies to forecast manufacturing costs as of 2019. The fully burdened direct labor wage rate in Mexico, fully, you know what it is? $3.95 compared to $4.50 in China. So again, going back to this accountant, whoever this person is, not only were they brilliant to move it to Mexico to avoid the tariffs, but also the labor in Mexico is less than the labor in China. Imagine how competitive they're about to be. And I don't know if you're okay with that. Maybe you're not okay with that. Maybe there's a reason why this guy running for office who was a former president knows what China's up to and wants to make sure he can put a stop to this.
The auto workers will not have any jobs. All of these cars are going to be made in China.
And according to official figures, 20% of light vehicles sold last year in the Latin American country were imported from China, equivalent of 273,000 plus, which also represents a growth of 50% to 2022. And meanwhile, we, America, historically, every year we were selling more and more cars that we were exporting to China. And those numbers have dropped. They're like, look, we used to like your cars. We don't need it anymore because we figured out everything you were doing. We're going to build our own cars and we're going to sell it to ourselves. You guys do whatever you want to do. But guess what? Not only are we no longer going to buy from you, America, because we already figured everything you did, we stole all your tactics, but we're also going to make cars now cheaper and we're going to sell it to your customers, your people. How? Here's the data for you. Check this out. From 2006 till today, this shows number of new passenger vehicles and light trucks exported from U.S. to China. Look at the chart. From 14,000 and all of a sudden 12,000, 23,000, 25,000. Look at 2010, 89. We go up to 125, 153, 246, 314, 254, 236, 262. All of a sudden, now you want to put tariffs? 163, 192, 142, 155, and counting, going lower and lower and lower. One, because they're saying if you're going to put the tariffs, we're not going to buy cars from you. And two, we're going to build better cars cheaper than yours and we're going to sell it to your people. So the question then becomes, do you want jobs to stay in America or do you want jobs to go to China or Mexico? Two, do you want profits to go to companies in America or do you want profits to go to companies like China and Mexico? You, by the way you vote, will be able to say which you prefer. Because at this point, China is taking our lunch because they can, unless if America does something about it. And one of the tools we have to do something about it is called tariffs. But in order for that to happen with Mexico and Canada, someone needs to relook at that NAFTA agreement because there's a lot of leaks in that agreement that's preventing us potentially from doing this. If you got value out of this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And by the way, if you want to kind of go back, I did a video on the U.S.-China trade war over tariffs a few years ago. If you don't remember it, highly recommend you go watch it. Click here on the link, go watch the video. You'll learn about what happened between Trump and China during that time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye, bye-bye.